I'm recording.
Yes, it's perfect.
Perfect. Igor, it is fantastic to see you, and it is fantastic to have you back with the Basis conference once again. I think it was 2016.
Yeah.
So this is sort of an update on a lot of the stuff that's coming out of the United States and Russia. Essentially, what do you have to say to sort of summarize things up and give us an update? And how are you doing anyway?
I'm doing very well. I'm writing more and more books, and they are selling very well in Poland. Uh, yes, what I'm doing currently is describing and analyzing what is going on with the world, because we are on the verge of a major transformation, which will, generally speaking, uh, cause a collapse of the not only of the financial system and many economies, but first and foremost of the societies, of certain societies. Because the problem is, let me explain shortly what is enforcing, what is causing it. The main cause is such that we are part of the of the cosmos, essentially, and we cannot destroy ourselves, and we cannot follow a self-destructive path, which is what the humanity is doing right now. It has developed very dangerous, uh, I would say, anti-evolutionary path, which means reversal of the human evolution. And the problem is such that, for example, let me give you an example, because it may not be clear how I describe this. Let me give you an example. For example, I'm doing lessons for children, for kids, about creativity and development of independent critical thinking, and which is in fact development of consciousness, which it is such a thing that you cannot go to the people and tell them and explain them, because they wouldn't accept it, because it's not in their, vocabulary. Such a term as development of consciousness is just an example, uh, which is generally, because it's not the only example, the societies are going backwards, essentially. You cannot go and just tell the people and expect that they will change their, patterns of behavior and so on, because they wouldn't see such an information. It has to be done in such a way that the people will, the societies, in fact, will hit the wall, and it will hurt. And only then one may expect any change, any transformation of the worldviews and so on. So what I'm doing currently is writing about this, about the mechanisms behind this, because we are very close to a breakthrough now.
So what sort of mechanisms are you talking about? I mean, we're talking about the maybe the World Economic Forum, the Bilderbergers, the
I
Rothschilds, or whatever. I mean, are they the causes, or what are these forces and causes?
I, I mean mostly psychological uh, foundations of the evolution of humanity, and cultural foundations of evolution of humanity, and of development, of personal development, uh, which is which are the things that are almost not understood in this world. It's what we see in the world presently is as I mentioned, societies going backwards in evolutionary path, which means that the epidemic of the fake news, so-called fake news, uh, 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 rejection of the laws of nature, essentially, for example, explosions of populism, which is in fact escape from freedom, from democracy, such things uh, are in fact a reflection of a one major or more general law or principle, which is that so the consciousness in the personalities of the people starts playing any role. It is blocked in a way. And uh, the effect of this is such that the entire countries lost ability to development, including scientific and technological development even on any level. You can see such a thing, which is the collapse of the church is also a reflection of the fundamental problem, because it is a bankruptcy of this spirituality connected with this culture. So it is called a societal regression. And what I'm doing is describing this, what has caused this, and how people can come out of this trap.
I mean, it was said way back in I think the end of the 1950s. If there was any kind of contact between humanity and mankind, things like the church would collapse, and major institutions would collapse. Do you think there's any connection with what was been going on in the last 70 years and what's happening now?
Yes, it is a connect. There is a connection, because it's just what is developing presently, and it will lead the main objective of this operations. Let's put it this way: the main objective is to cause a collapse. Uh, 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 I mean, collapse of our culture, of our societies, which is the only thing that may force people to, reevaluate their worldviews, their perception of reality, because it is flawed on a very fundamental level, which, as I mentioned, you cannot do this just by any argument, rational argument. It is just impossible. It is, I would say, that humanity has fallen that low.
Now, a lot of people know you as the person who discovered the Nazi bell and all those German esoteric devices. What brought you from that kind of stuff that you were finding out about, these kind of flying saucers and things like that, to come to this deep thinking on a sociological level?
It may sound strange at the first glance, but the fact is that what I initially was working on, I mean the Nazi technology and certain projects, is another aspect of the changes on Earth, because it is a gateway to the stars in a way. Uh, it was something that was to enforce the transformation, and because if you reach a stage when humanity is mentally represents the level of a primitive people, and at the same time has all the tools to go into the stars, then it creates it enforces a change of humanity, ingression in a way, because it cannot be allowed.
Well, that's the point.
Such a civilization so undeveloped cannot go to to other planets, for example, which the German technology would allow them to, because it was a different approach to gravity, and enabling mastering of anti-gravity propulsion and of the time space, essentially. And it was part of what I'm doing today. It might not have been obvious at initially, but
Now, could you go into
in
that
fact,
deeper?
Excuse me, could you
Could you go
repeat?
into that deeper? You mentioned time, space, gravity, extra, going to the stars. I mean, it was a bit more than flying saucers with BMW engines in them, making them rotate. You're talking something of much greater.
Yeah. Okay. The paradox is such that science claims to be to have a ability to develop, making progress and so on, but at the same times it clings to the theory, I mean Einstein's theory, which is over 100 years old, obsolete, doesn't fit the observation, at least in space, anymore. And it is a major, block, making any progress in this field impossible, because the fact is that anti-gravity is a result of a coupling of various kinds of forces, such as electromagnetism and gravity. You can generate anti-gravity only by linking electromagnetism with gravity, with time-space theory. And
Well, this is what some people refer to as non-Einsteinian physics, and that's what the Germans were working on, basically.
yes, but exactly, and the most important breakthrough that the Germans made was getting to a theory of gravity and anti-gravity, obviously, which is not based on the same presumptions, which enables to link gravity with other forces in nature, which is the key. And this is the key. This is the key to the stars in a way. So an alternative understanding of gravity.
Some people would refer to that as the electric universe principle, where the electric fields are the dominant forces and gravity doesn't actually exist at all.
I wouldn't say that electric forces are dominant, but it just you cannot make any progress without understanding the connection between gravity and other forces. That's the key. And as long as the science will not be able to see these connections, it will not make any progress. And what the Germans did was a alternative way forward.
Can you go really deeper into that? You mentioned about space-time. I mean, and all that. Explore
there
that.
There is a presumption that in generally accepted physics, that time-space is, as they call it, coupled with masses and with forces, with fields in nature. So, for example, if you would achieve a kind of separation of fields for example, electromagnetic fields, separation from the environment, you would achieve something that is called isolation of time space, creating a bubble of time space, which is a key to the anti-gravity propulsion. And the problem is only such that because the conventional physics, I mean the generally accepted physics, doesn't understand this relationship, there is error in the equations, the order of 1 and 30 zeros. But the Germans were doing this experimentally. They were creating conditions for such a separation to take place, and they were achieving anti-gravity essentially in a way that the Einstein's theory doesn't predict and doesn't allow, in fact. So that was the difference. You can create a bubble of time space, and this makes anti-gravity, shortly speaking. But you have to understand how you can separate electromagnetic fields generally.
And can you expand on that? So essentially, a bubble of space-time is floating like a bubble of air in the sea of our space-time, so it can move anywhere.
You can you have, for example, vortices of various kinds in nature, but apart from normal vortices, there are vortices also which separate themselves from the external, from the environment, from the time space outside it. A ball lightning is such a kind of vortex, which keeps temperature of many thousands of degrees inside, but doesn't exchange this energy with the environment, which is a kind of analogy to such a vortex that the Germans were experimenting on. It creates a kind of a bubble. There are reports of, for example, of ball lightnings that can penetrate obstacles, such as pane of a windshield in an airplane, for example. It is quite a common phenomenon, but it is just not understood. And in fact, it is a gateway to a new physics. It's based on observation, based on already accessible information, which is nevertheless not seen by the scientists, because they have a theory, Einstein's theory, that doesn't allow them seeing any relationships between these things.
So could you give any examples of these? I mean, we've heard of the Glock, and we've heard of a strange-looking aircraft. They've got the flying saucers, you've got the flying wing, stealthy type aircraft to radar and stuff. I mean, this is all stuff we're talking about 1942, 43. Is that right? But
Yes,
things have moved on. You're dealing with red mercury.
War. Yes. Initially, I was describing this device, the so-called bell, without any reference to documents, because I couldn't reproduce these documents. But eventually, me and other researchers in other countries have found numerous documents confirming that the Germans were doing such a project, which consisted in making of a device which was called the bell, which generated vortices of similar to what the ball lightning, for example, is, only that with very high velocities and very high densities of energy. and they were observing very interesting effects, and essentially they themselves described it in, it is there is such a wording in one of the documents. The Germans themselves described it as a project aimed at controlling gravity.
Could you explain what projects and what effects and what was really going on with all that stuff? Red
Uh,
mercury counter-rotating energy fields, is that inside the bell? You had one energy field and another in the same space going in opposite directions.
yes, they have created a vortex of plasma, of mercury plasma, ionized mercury inside a cylinder, which was spinning very fast at very high velocities. And it created such a vortex of ionized matter creates electromagnetic field. Only that in this case, this field was closed, separated from the environment. The lines of magnetic fields were completely closed, and it created precisely such a phenomenon of separation of magnetic fields, of electromagnetic fields, which by a kind of induction created anti-gravity. It was similar to the experiments, post-war experiments with superconductors, where they also achieved a reduction of Earth's gravitational field. Only that in this case, it was much more efficient because it was a much greater angular velocity and much greater concentration of energy. Generally, the bell wasn't a flying machine. It was part of the propulsion system, but enabling us to understand the very principle. And this is the key generally to a different approach to gravity.
What do you mean part of a propulsion system? Where was the propulsion system? The so-called red mercury engine.
Yes, I'm saying so because it has emerged a blueprint, German blueprint, which showed the bell as part of something larger, of kind of generally a propulsion system. It was only a central part of something, but it was larger. Well, I cannot say exactly what it was.
I was just asking. You could tell me. You can tell me, Igor. I mean, nobody else is listening. You can tell me. I'll keep it a big secret.
It seems to be a part of a propulsion system. That's what I can say with the full responsibility. I wouldn't like to speculate on this, but nevertheless, it is certain that it was their alternative way to master gravity, alternative in relation to the Einstein's theory, which for the Germans was a Jewish science, for example. And they, on the other hand, they were the creators of quantum physics. And it was natural for them to try to explain these things on the basis of quantum physics, not a non-quantum theory like Einstein's theory.
So where did all that stuff go? I mean, in those years when General Patton, I understand, is it Kamler or Hamler? I keep on getting mixed up. What happened to all that stuff? Did it go to Argentina? Did it go to Antarctica? You know, Admiral Byrd, all that stuff?
I don't know what happened to the device or devices itself, because it was probably more than one. But I can only say that the Germans in Argentina are fully aware of this, and I had an impression that they are keeping, how to say it, they're guarding it, in some way. I mean, probably the documentations ended up in South America.
And where do you think that led? Antarctica, 1930s. They were working down there and stuff.
One of the Germans said that on Antarctica, in Antarctica, there was a temporary base, but it was just a temporary base, maybe not, maybe more than one, but generally it ended up in South America itself.
So, do you have any of those, any indications about what happened with Admiral Byrd at the end of the war, early the late 40s, and Antarctica?
It's waiting to be used in a kind of a game. I would say in a proper moment, which hasn't come yet. They're planning to do something about it because it was obvious from the information that I got, but I don't know what exactly and nor when.
I mean, the Order of the Black
Uh,
Sun, the symbol of the Order of the Black Sun, that spiral with the slight zigzag
yeah,
on it, that has been found, according to Linda Moulton Howe, in a massive structure in Antarctica, which is very ancient.
I'm not aware of
All
that.
right.
I don't know anything
I
about it.
mean, right now we're talking in a climate of UFO disclosure with the CIA talking about unidentified aerial phenomena. There are people talking about fake alien invasions. Werner von Braun mentioned this, and also the trips to Mars. I mean, anything like that did you find anything on that sort of, that the Germans did get to Mars? When you talked about, did he get
I
anything?
would like to reconnect this what you said with the transformation, with the changes on Earth, present changes, because I have an impression, and this I even dare to say it's more than impression, that what we are seeing presently, I mean the disclosure of the information on UFOs in the United States, is just one step in a chain of steps that will follow. And the perception of the things, of this part of reality, will inevitably change. I mean, humans' perception of this, of the fact that we may not be alone in space, and it will change very quite rapidly. One step after another is just a one step, but it will start changing. People's attitude will start changing pretty quickly, and
Now,
it will lead to a full realization that there are other civilizations in space.
I shared a document with you about human augmentation from the British Ministry of Defence and the German armed forces. Now, the whole point about the Bases project is that Barry King's father was in Germany or possibly Poland, and he found at the close of the war, and he found a lab that the Germans had with, quote, strange looking humans and a strange looking aircraft. And that was taken, that sort of technology in advancing or augmentation of human beings was, I understand, taken to this country. Have you found anything on that level? I'm talking
I
about
don't
I'm
know.
talking about superhumans.
Yes, I don't know much about this, but what I can say is that it was in particular Himmler's, which was who was the chief of the SS, Himmler's obsession to create something like this, and they were even fantasizing about the kind of, as we would call it today, cyborg, uh, and they were carrying out various experiments on betterment of the human, at least in their in their perception, in their categories.
What
But
exactly do you mean by that? Because it's been said that this was happening in certain concentration camps because they wanted access to certain race types for the purposes of doing this kind of process, which has been continued on into the Western and Russian culture.
yes, I have shreds of information in this respect only. And what I can say only is that the SS was doing something about it, but I don't know exactly what.
What about Kamler? Sorry, I keep on. Is it Kamler or Hamler? Kamler, I think it is.
Kamler. It was probably the responsibility, what the such experiments that you mentioned was probably in the domain of the so-called Institute of Hygiene of the Waffen-SS, probably, at least from the information that I have, but I don't know much about it. I don't know how it ended up. I just have pieces of information, and I don't know what exactly they had done. Unfortunately,
Now,
I cannot explain it fully to you.
You've been on a lot of TV programs, Ancient Aliens. I think BBC did a documentary, or maybe Channel 4. And with these kind of programs, there's an awful lot of stuff that's said that is left out. Can you tell us anything more that hasn't been broadcast that has been left out of those programs?
I always, I don't know in how many documentaries I was, but what I can say is that I always try to tell them or get them interested in the, for example, in the scientific aspects of these German projects, in which they were never interested. They concentrated on what can be seen, on what can be shown on the screen, on the emotional, I would say, messaging, and without going deep into details that for me were fascinating.
Well, I'm fascinated with that, and I'd like you to go deep into the details. Tell us the details.
I would have to describe the science of
go ahead. Go ahead
of the German projects, but I already said that what was the general principle, and I don't know what else to do without going from the start.
Well, I really would be fascinated by that. I'm into the science. I'm into the counter-rotational fields, scalar energetics. What about that?
You know, the strange thing here is such. One of the things that amazed me the most is that the project was granted top priority. It was labeled officially. It was such a term appeared in the documents as decisive for the war at the very beginning of this project.
When did all that start? Because, I mean, obviously we had the Vengeance weapons, the V weapons, Vengeance V1, V2, the A1 rocket.
No, it was something different. It was on its own rights, so to speak. In September or November.
Sorry, Igor, I'm going to say this. The reason is there are many people, especially with the aspects of the way that the war and everything finished, that the war never finished. And it's been going on, and this kind of science has been working in the background. So I'm really interested in anything, the technical side details.
I would say that the war has finished, but certain aspects.
Well, the war in Europe with tanks and aircraft finished, but the war, in essence, Fourth Reich, it continued.
I mean, there was a wider reality behind the war. and it
Explain that.
hasn't ended. It hasn't ended. Should I explain this?
Yes, explain everything. Everything's just free. Just do what you want to do. Tell us everything. You will tell us everything now.
Okay, I would try.
My
Maybe
Belfast
not
accent
everything.
doesn't mix with German.
You know, one cannot imagine a greater milestone in the history of humanity than having in possession something that would allow you to go to the stars. It is the most important thing since the invention of fire, for example. The consequences of this know-how and everything that is associated and of the consequences, secondary consequences of this, would be hard to imagine, in fact, because it is something that may change humanity quite fundamentally. Realization, because it is a tool for a contact in a way, you know. It changes the perspective from national or planetary at best to galactic consciousness. It is something, as I mentioned, a gateway to the future and to the stars, to the cosmos. And I don't know, I cannot understand, for example, how when they initiated this project at a stage that no bell was ever built yet. It was only planned in general schematics, you know. Why this project was granted the top priority and top security classification in September or November 1941, before any substantial works have started. It suggests that they got something of the potential of which they already knew from something. And
is that from Maria Ortiz?
I'm not sure if it's intelligible, if it's understandable what I said, but
it's immense.
It's something from beyond this reality, I would say, and it's there are plenty of such elements in this story. Another example is the strange, I would say, medical or scientific consequences. For example, what was going on with the humans that were used as guinea pigs, you know, in these experiments. It was something very strange.
Explain.
Cannot be. Should I explain it?
Go ahead, explain.
This device, the bell, generated various kinds of energy, not only gravitational energy, but also other forms, which are hard to understand from our present perspective. For example, there was something that was causing, I will pass on to the humans in a moment, but let me start from plants. It emitted some kind of energy which caused strange effects of, being observed in the case of plants. A plant was turning white or light gray. It lived, apparently, which was amazing, for some time, the order of a week, several days. And then, after that, it relatively suddenly, they described it as a cascade process. it decomposed, but in a matter of hours, suddenly, after a week or several days.
Sorry, I just want to make clear. Are you saying that they made a gray, alien type of gray?
I mean,
Humanoid being.
no, green plants were turning white or gray.
Okay.
And then lived for some time, which was strange. And after in a certain moment, they were decomposing, turning into a kind of greasy mass, and it was something similar to what is observed in the case of certain accelerators, nuclear reactors, which is called oxidative stress. It is consists in the fact that particles of oxygen or chlorine or chlorine consisting of two atoms are split into single atoms, which are much more reactive, and they consume the cell from the inside, in a way. But what was taking place in the case of the bell was much more intense than anything similar observed, known presently. And similarly, strange effects were observed in the case of animals and humans.
I've been told that the effects of this on people around the bell, literally, they dissolved. They just...
Not exactly. Initially, what was seen were certain disruptions of the central nervous system, such as a kind of sensual phenomena, such as strange taste in the mouth and headaches and such things. After that, in a second phase, which clearly, let me go back to this, which clearly indicated damage to the central nervous system, and generally that it affected the conduction of stimuli between neurons. But after that, after some time, what was seen were kinds of ulcerations on the skin in the body, similar to caused by radioactivity, but it didn't end on this. After some time later on, what was seen was giving the Germans the impression that the person was falling apart. And I remember, by the way, if I may add some detail, my friend from the United Kingdom, Nick Cook, was making a documentary on Area 51.
Yeah, the hunt for Zero Point.
Yes, but I'm referring to a documentary.
Yes, I think he called it the hunt for Zero Point. I'm not sure.
I don't remember that. I don't remember.
I met him once. Yeah.
I only remember that it was in two parts and quite long on Area 51 specifically. And I remember a case which has emerged in the Area 51 that some people working there started dying, and the case was so serious that it ended up in the Supreme Court in the United States. Obviously, it has been there has been an agreement between the victims or widows of these employees and the U.S. and the American government, so that it couldn't be a court case with all the affidavits, the documents, because the matter was quite secret. So they preferred to pay money to the widows of these victims, and not allow a full court proceedings. But nevertheless, sorry for saying it so chaotically. Nevertheless, the case was such that the widows of the employees from Area 51 were describing in this Nukes documentary that their husbands were falling apart. Effectively, that the skin was falling apart from the body, for example.
So this was this was happening over a period of relatively long time. I mean, days or
relatively quickly. I mean, in a matter of days. It was a question of days. So it was for me. Sorry for interrupting the narrative, but
continue.
It was something very similar to what was seen in the case of the bell. Very strange, harmful radiation or energy, but I don't know what it was. It might have been neutrons and one, but with a full responsibility, I cannot explain this because it was much stronger than as I mentioned, than what is observed in similar devices. I mean, accelerator, for example, as similar devices.
What are you saying is happening with those accelerators? I mean, we have the huge accelerator at CERN, and things falling apart there. People sort of
yes, but not to this extent. Not such effects that the entire plant would become white and then dissolve into some greasy substance. It's much too strong for such an analogy. So nevertheless, yeah.
If the bell was some kind of mechanism for using a bigger machine, surely there would be effects on crew or anybody involved with that.
Yes, the information about this project that they had was from mostly from the final months. And what I can say is that at this time, at this phase, they were concentrating mostly on limiting these unwanted effects, and pretty much with the success. And I don't know, maybe it's that some mercury ions were colliding with the electrode or with the cylinder and causing radiation, and maybe by perfecting the vortex in a way, one could limit such effects. I don't know, but nevertheless, the Germans were trying to limit these effects.
Now, you said near the end, surely as the war declined and things felt, imploded, so to speak, was funding maintained on this? How long did they maintain the project before they had to give up?
I don't remember, but I guess that it was continued until more or less March 1945, until the approaching front line
forced them right up to...
Yes, forced them to evacuate.
And who got it?
To the very end.
But who got that? And there must have been a lot more involved. Nothing. I mean, we're not talking about V2s here.
The main aim. What one may ask yourself a question: why they pinned such great hopes on this? What would be decisive for the war in this? It's not difficult to explain, because to imagine at least, because a weapon a carrying platform, a flying craft in a way, with such a technology, with such a propulsion, would have a global range, would be very hard to destroy, to counteract generally, and it could deliver, for example, the weapons of mass destruction, such as chemical, biological, or nuclear, to any point on the globe without any ability of the enemy, without any way of stopping it, you know. Uh, like the V2 missile, for example, which couldn't be shut down. It had a velocity of at the final phase of the flight, I guess about 5,500 kilometers per hour. So only that the V2 had a small range, you know. But if they would have a fleet of anti-gravity crafts, for example, weapons with such a propulsion, with global range, they would have win the war pretty quickly. I would
Well,
say
there is talk that they did. Now, if you know you're about to militarily lose in war, and there are going to be American and tanks, coming up to knock on the door, and you're still funding it, maybe they knew they were going to have a direct exchange and continue that in another country or environment. So I mean, how would have they? I mean,
yes,
you don't
yes.
continue something like that unless you know you're going to keep it on. I mean, otherwise, just pack up and run for your life.
Uh, yes, but um, I didn't see for a long time. I didn't see any signs of such a technology being developed in the United States. It has changed recently because apparently the Americans have made great progress, which is visible, for example, even from the patents that they received for such a propulsion in the recent years. But
Well, that's declassified material. I mean, but
patents
we're
cannot
talking
be.
1947 UFOs, George Adamski with flying saucers, which look remarkably like the design of the saucers that the
Yes,
Germans had.
yes, and I remember even in an article about close encounter between them and some crew members of a flying craft, when I mean the wife of the no, it was Betty and Barney Hill. Excuse
Yes,
me.
yes.
Then when Betty, I mean the wife of this man, said at some point, "My God, they look like Nazis." There was such an element.
Now, I understand
So
that the Russians were working on that sort of stuff as well.
yes, they did. I know that, they had a scientist uh, during the war and after the war who was an academic. In the Soviet Union, it was a degree higher than professor, not just a member of an academy. Piotr Kapica, or Peter Kapica, I would say, of Polish origin, by the way. And he was a co-worker of Professor Walter Gerlach, the German mastermind behind the bell, co-worker from the 1930s. And all all the documents that the Soviet intelligence have obtained at the end, after the end of the war, went to him, and Kapica apparently understood pretty much of it, pretty much. So I can say that at least at the initial stage, I mean, the first years after the war, the Soviets had a better starting point, so to speak. I mean, they understood quite a lot of it. I'm not sure how it was with the Americans, because I don't know. I'm not aware of any scientists who might have understood this at this
Well,
stage.
I think with the
But
Americans, they took
uh,
the scientists, they took the German scientists, but the Russians wanted to understand it better, so they had their own scientists do the
yeah,
development.
yeah, yes, but Einstein's theory, which for them was like a dogma, uh, uh, created such a perceptual barriers that it would be in a situation when they got only fragments of the larger knowledge, because it was such a rule that people working on it knew only fragments, So the mechanism was such that such an information or interrogation protocol, for example, went to a panel of professors, and they rejected it because they couldn't accept such a thing, So they were not aware of any alternative approach to gravity. And it was, I suspect it would be very difficult. It is a cost of a high secrecy in a way, because you cannot expand the panel of the circle of consultants. It's always few people not exchanging very much information with the outside scientific community, for example. So it might have been quite a challenge for the Americans. I'm only speculating. I don't know. But what I can say is that the Soviets, at the initial stage, shortly after the war, they had a better starting point or better position. But I don't know what is going on in Russia in this respect today. I have no, access to any information from Russia now. So I cannot say. I suspect that if the photographs of the Americans of strange looking flying machines are coming from the United States, from the vicinity of several air bases since mid 90s, then I suspect that any other power, maybe not a superpower, but a power, uh, would uh, would be mobilized by such an information enough to to initiate similar research programs, especially in a situation when you have patents published about such a propulsion in the United States. So I suspect
Precisely what sort of propulsion are you referring to? What?
pretty much resembling the bow. Uh, when there is a kind of a torus. Torus is a donut-shaped shape,
Yeah.
Pipe closed in a loop, in which a plasma, ionized heavy ions, are spinning, creating such a closed magnetic field that I mentioned earlier. So it's very much similar. I'm
It's
not sure
said
about it.
it's said that one of the sort of so-called alien triangle craft, which was I think featured in various science
Yes,
fiction things,
it is pretty much that,
that was
because
man-made, but it had what they called mercury engines in them, which would
yes,
infer that.
drawing attached to the patent of this propulsion by U.S. Navy, by the way, is also triangular in the patent documentation. It may not be proven of anything, but there are too many pieces of a jigsaw puzzle overlapping each other, not to just to ignore it. It's too many information coming in this field, from this field. from the United States recently.
Now, you mentioned that this craft with the bell as a part of its drive system. You mentioned that if it could be deliverable, it could deliver nuclear weapons. How much do you know about the German nuclear program and the plan to drop bombs on Manhattan, and ultimately why the American atom bomb was called the Manhattan Project and had a yield very similar to an alleged series of bombs? In other words, there's a few bits of German nukes ended up being dropped in Japan.
Yes, what I can say is that the Western researchers, historians, writing many books on the German nuclear program or programs during the entire period from 1945 until quite recently, were repeating all the same cliche in a way, namely that they adopted a presumption that what they were looking for, or evidence for what they were looking, would be something kind of a mirror reflection of the American Manhattan Project, which wasn't the case in the first place, because the German works on this were pretty much decentralized, very decentralized. There were many institutions doing their part in this works, but also they were pursuing many parallel lines, and this was the main error of the Western researchers, that they assumed that it would have to be something similar to the American project. It wasn't. Another thing is that they concentrated on the heavy water and on the reactor built by the German in Haigerloch in the Alps, and which, from the point of view of nuclear weapons, both these elements were completely irrelevant, because a reactor of this kind on heavy water, for example, wasn't needed to make a nuclear weapon. What you did need would be a line of centrifuges or other devices to enrich the uranium, which had nothing to do with heavy water or the reactor. These were very different things. That was the second error of the of the Western researchers, that they were circumnavigating so to speak, the essence of the thing. And another thing that they didn't realize, I mean the Western researchers, was that the most important, they had access, the Western intelligence services in the final months of the war, or shortly after, they had access pretty much to the Western Germany, more or less. And they, on this basis, they extrapolated the picture and assumed that the general picture was that the Western Germany was representative to the overall picture, which was the third error. Because the most important thing, research posts and institutions and laboratories were located beyond their grasp, because the eastern part of Germany was considered pretty much safe from error rates. And the most important research posts were beyond the grasp of the Allied, Western intelligence services. And it created very different picture than what was in the West, because you had pretty much several in today's Poland, in the part of Poland that was then Germany. I have documents, such as intelligence documents, describing several research posts working on nuclear things. From the short description, more or less short, it follows that that the works were pretty much advanced. Yes, and generally the Germans were trying to not only make a different nuclear weapon and in a different way with different approaches, such as, for example, there were works on thorium, on radium amalgamates of mercury and radium and various isotopes, heavy isotopes, that which was something that didn't have an equivalent in the West. I mean, West from Germany. That was one thing, and another thing was that there are several intelligence documents saying that the German bomb would be quite small,
Exactly.
the size of a pineapple, for example. And there is a suspicion, I'm not sure of this, but there is a suspicion that they were trying. So the Germans were trying to make probably a nuclear weapon in a not necessarily in the same way that the Americans did. So, yeah. Okay. So I will try to finish this.
Yeah, okay.
So the Germans were probably approaching the question of construction of a nuclear weapon in a different way than the Americans did. And one of the strange elements in documents, intelligence documents referring to this, is that a references to a smaller, much smaller nuclear charge, the size of a pineapple, for example. And on the other hand, in other documents, there are references to some strange mixes of radioactive isotopes or substances. There is a suspicion that they were trying to use so-called isomers to make a nuclear charge. It was done by the team of Werner Heisenberg in the occupied Czechoslovakia, for example. So apparently, it seems that the German program wasn't one. There were many, perhaps complementing each other, but perhaps at least partially alternative to each other. And they were trying to do it differently, and Western intelligence services did not realize the most important, were not aware of the most important research efforts by the Germans. So generally, in recent years, my perception of the German quest to build a nuclear weapon has changed significantly. So maybe we will finish on this.
Well, Igor, this is bloody marvelous. Actually, it's good to see you.
Good to see you and hear you as well.
Yeah, it's good stuff.